Ready? All right. Call to order the Torch Lake Township Zoning Ordinance Steering Committee meeting of March 16th, 2022 at 6:21. Primary purpose of this meeting is to discuss the agenda items listed. Our first item on the agenda is public comment. There is no public, so there is no comment. Next item is approval of the agenda. Any proposed changes to the agenda? Hearing none, I make the motion to accept the agenda as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion has been moved and accepted to accept the agenda as presented. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Moving to the next item of business, approval of the March 3, 2022 minutes. I handed those out. I didn't mail them to you, I don't think. So take your time. We'll take 5 minutes to go through them. Just let me know when you're set. Sarah, you good with those? Everybody else?
Yep.
All right, then I will make the motion to accept the minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Oh, I had a possible correction.
Oh, possible?
Yeah.
All right.
I think it's just a typo. Under 5A landscaping, the last sentence, these standards are to maintained throughout the span of the site plan, or should that be, are to be maintained?
It's fine. You went to the appropriate school. Any other changes? If not, then we will move forward and accept the minutes as corrected. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion's been made and seconded to accept the minutes with changes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. So moving on to our first item of business, we have Article 4, overlay districts. And so, Sarah, it's your show.
Sure. So Article 4 with the overlay districts, this is new as this overlay. So an overlay district, just briefly, is the regular zoning is there. So for this waterfront, most of the zoning will be R1. So you'd have to comply with everything in the R1 district. But then these regulations would apply in certain instances. It's any property that's within 50 feet of the high water mark of Lake Michigan and Torch Lake, or 50 feet of from a stream, river, channel, or established wetlands. These are additional regulations that would apply just to those properties, as laid out in this district. So some of these are in your existing ordinance. So when I walk through that, but some of them, a lot of them are new. And when we talked about the initial document that I gave you and said how we're going to lay it out and all of that, I'm drawing a blank. Oh, the annotated summary. You said, give us the information. We'll decide at that time. We'd like to see what it kind of looks like. So I'm expecting you to have lots of comments about it because it is new and it's big change. So this waterfront overlay district, like I mentioned, is 50 feet basically from any water or wetlands would apply. It requires your minimum 100 feet of frontage on the water body. This is in the existing ordinance. It says you're required to have 100 foot of frontage on Torch Lake, but this does expand it to include the streams and rivers. So the intent with that is if the width of the property is 100 feet, typically we measure that at the road. and you say that they need 100 feet of frontage or a width of 100 feet on the water so that people don't create kind of pie-shaped lots, so more people end up with waterfront and it's very narrow, and then go back and can meet the width requirement on the road. So that's where that type of regulation comes from, is to try to at least have that minimum frontage so you don't get really narrow frontage on the water. The next one has to do with the setback from the road. This is the same as that's in the current ordinance. The only difference is kind of changing the terminology right now, and it's not really clear unless you know and you read through the ordinance. When you have waterfront property, your front setback that's on the road becomes your water setback, and then your rear becomes your road setback.
Right.
So, and that's common in a lot of communities, they flip, but I find when you're trying to enforce and regulate and explain to people what happens, everybody gets confused. And it kind of makes, some ways it makes sense, because you're going, well, the front of the house is typically on the water instead of the front of the house facing the road. But people are, when we're talking about setbacks in the front of properties and things like that, I find that it complicates it. So here, we're just saying, just to be clear, that the setback on the road or your front is reduced when you're on the waterfront, and that's down to 35 feet.
Our current ordinance clearly states that if you own a piece of waterfront property, the water side of the property is the front line.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big argument in our house, always had been, because when you don't live on the water, the front of your house is usually on the road. So I think if it's, as long as it's clarified in the definitions, is the main thing. I've just learned a long time ago not to refer to front or rear yards. It's a water side or the road side.
Yeah, so what happens is, in essence, your front setback gets reduced, and then the way this is working as the overlay district is that everything within 50 feet of the water, is in this overlay. And then we say anything that's in the overlay, you can't build on that portion of your property except for, and that's the next section. So essentially, instead of calling it a water setback or it's in the overlay district, you can't build. It takes away some of that confusion. So this is a no build zone unless you're doing, you're putting in your deck or your stairway, whatever this allows. So then we don't get that confusion between what's your front, what's your rear, and what that looks like. And it may be somebody's side, depending on where their road is. The road may be, run into the water. Say you're on a road end. So it's actually kind of your side property from the road, just takes that all away, hopefully.
I could,
I'm sorry.
I wanted to see if we couldn't go back to the beginning. I got a couple of questions.
Sure.
So in essence, the overlay supersedes the existing zoning ordinance for that piece of property.
In a way, I mean, how this waterfront overlay is drafted is it does, it puts additional regulations on top of that zoning district, yes.
But it does supersede if there's a conflict.
Right, yes.
The overlay
Yes.
takes it on.
Okay, so I thought the roadside setback, which used to be the back side on waterfront property, was 35 feet. So this doesn't change the setback from the road, right?
Right, this would,
It just changes the terminology.
right, in the field, on the road, there will not be a change in what happens out there.
Okay,
Right, currently it's 35 feet if you have waterfront off of the road.
right. Okay, and I had a question about the established wetlands. 50 feet overlay on those. Is that what the, pardon? Heidi, whatever, the person who regulates wetlands and tells you where you can build, did they require a 50-foot set?
They do not there's no required setbacks from wetlands in any regulations.
So my question, or my concern is that between the critical dunes and the wetlands, we might, by requiring 50 foot setback from wetlands render properties unbuildable.
Yeah.
Well, and I had the same problem, that in many cases, once you get up to a certain point, they tell you where you can build and not build based on that state rules, I guess, that
Right,
they're enforcing. So my question is, I don't know why we'd want to put something in associated with wetlands, especially 50 feet. I mean, I know for a fact, my property sits on, our depth is 20 inches to the water table. And we've got a lot of wetlands, but I was allowed to build within a certain area. I mean, if that were in place, I could have put the second building in. So again, I think that's something I'd really want to raise as an issue for the planning commission to decide if they really wanted to do 50 feet or not.
Well, I mean, and you're not required to have a setback from wetlands. We don't currently have a setback from wetlands. It is a good practice to have some type of setback. 50 feet may be extreme since you haven't had anything. Maybe it'd be more appropriate to be 15 feet, but at the same time, I can understand, that may limit properties. And I don't know off the top of my head, wonder if we have that data. It's going to say how many properties or what the impact is of that, like on a map when you look at it, kind of what that area would be.
Well, you take, for instance, if you're driving north on 31, you pass my property. About 50 feet off the road, from there until about 50 feet from the house is all wetlands. I mean, it's a whole low-lying area, and it's that whole area along that road. And there are others. I mean, if you look out by the airport, all that stuff outside of the airport is there, though I think it's timberland as a zone, but it's all wetlands. So again, my concern is putting something in that is pretty restrictive given the low-lying areas of a lot of our community.
Is that something you think you'd want to remove? I mean, this is new, so if you,
I would, it's one of these things, I would remove it, but on the other hand, that's not our job. So I would say I'd put a big question mark and put it in
Okay.
red that, there's concern with that particular thing. I also have a concern on, is this then for resale properties or just new construction?
the overlay?
Yeah, well, these restrictions.
Yeah.
So if somebody sells their property
Mm-hmm.
and they don't have, as you go further back in this thing, all the vegetation and all that stuff, does the resale trigger this ordinance or not?
No.
Okay. So it's really only new construction that
Right.
this is going to impact on the two waterfronts for which there's almost no property.
Right. Yeah, reconstruction. So, and we can talk about that when we get
Yep.
into that protection strip a little bit.
That's fine. That was just something I'm looking at, because then the
Yeah.
next issue is enforcement.
Yeah, so it says new dwelling or a seawall. So if somebody's putting in some sort of,
So that's in addition to a home that exists and property that exists. Now, seeing how I sat on the ZBA for the Seawall case, how are we going to define that seawall? Because that, you now have a precedence as to what is a seawall based on the ZBA's decision.
yeah, I
So
mean,
we
we
may
could go with
look
whatever
at-
the ZBA says, or we can go brand new because it's new written policy.
And that's fine, but
Yeah.
the big seawall thing was, is it a structure or not?
What did the ZBA say?
Well, they said it was not a structure, and the individual appealed to the circuit court, and they did not find either way. They just said he didn't have standing.
Oh, okay.
But the judge had a very interesting comment. He said, evidently, the ZBA of Torch Lake Township has determined that the pyramids are not a structure. Because the ZBA finding was that a rock on top of a rock can't be a structure without concrete or rebar.
Right.
So the judge, and there was one other big temple down in South America that he
Machu Picchu
mentioned.
or something.
Yeah,
like that.
something like
probably.
that. He said, so the ZBA thinks those aren't structures. So it's something that
touche.
we need to make sure that the planning commission looks at and we highlight
Yeah.
it here. So those were just
Okay.
in that opening paragraph, I started looking and thinking about all this stuff. And then you mentioned the 50-foot from the high water mark. Given the discussion at the last planning commission, is that, do you think that's still relevant? Or is that another one of these things, or do we circle this thing and say, hey, guys, when you start determining the high water mark, this is going to bring this ordinance into effect?
Yeah, and it all depends on how we define the ordinary high water mark, if it is, and I would do that in the definition section, if it's the elevation or if it's vegetation. And I don't know what the planning commission's gonna do.
Nobody does.
Yeah,
All
so,
right.
but that's one of the things, kind of that amendment that was proposed for that ordinary high water mark. It talks about it in one place. It's mentioned a couple of different places, but here we just do ordinary high water mark, and then there's a definition for ordinary high water mark instead of saying from this elevation here or from this, it's just, so if we change it, we only change it in one place.
In the definitions, right?
Right, in
Okay.
the definition, yeah. So,
I did have one other thing on that page. C, the last
Yep.
sentence down there, not including motorized boats. And I'm wondering if we should say in operational condition or something like that, because you don't want,
and it probably should say, well, motorized and non-motorized, because like this is not allowing you to have your kayak in that area, but you can have your powerboat in that area, right?
right.
Well, the question is, is it, for instance, storage?
Right.
Because when you read over on the other one, I think it's indicating that you can't store your boat within the 50 feet. Am I reading that correctly?
That's in your current ordinance. It seems like there was a spot that, let me see.
At the bottom, in
Okay.
parentheses, it's motor vehicles, but go over to the other side, not to be stored within that. So for instance, people that have boats, they pull them up and they leave them near the shoreline, turn them over upside down.
Right.
The question becomes, is that
Is that-
allowable
is
or
that-
isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it could be trailer to that point.
I think the proper term rather than boat is, you should use watercraft. And if you use
Yeah.
watercraft, it applies to anything you're using in the water, whether it's motorized or non-motorized. And we should, I don't see any reason why that should be prohibited from being on the shore.
Wow. And,
But do you want to indicate that the watercraft has to be operational? I mean,
Well, that's
you have an old
to
boat,
determine
old
whether
boat
something's
that's
a
rusting
derelict.
out, sitting there,
Yeah.
then they can say, well, it's a watercraft, I can have it there.
I took it, I wondered if we were missing, should we say discarded motor vehicles? But then really any watercraft with gas in it could be polluting, right?
Right.
So any motorized watercraft, discarded or otherwise?
Well, I think I don't think that we should make a determination of motorized or non-motorized. If it's a watercraft, there's so many kayaks and sailboats and paddleboards and all this stuff. I do think the concern would be to prohibit a derelict watercraft that's non-usable and somebody just leaves it there. That's what your neighbor is
Okay.
going to have a
Yeah,
problem
that makes
with.
sense, because people do, in the summer, pull canoes, kayaks, jet skis. Sometimes they have hoists, they pull those up on the beach, or winches, instead of putting them on a hoist. So,
Or their hoists are, if you go down the lake, some of the hoists are, for those craft, are half on the shore and half in the water. So I would say that's, this is an area that PC is going to have to spend some time on.
Okay.
Oh, come on.
I love you. I mean, I'm just trying to help you here. All right.
Okay, so everybody's good with that first section, then moving on to 4.2.4 structure regulations. So this is where it says there's no structures allowed in this area, which is within 50 feet of the high water mark, except for a stairway and a ground level walkway. And these two are currently allowed in your ordinance, and this language is right from your current ordinance.
okay, and so this, not exceeding 48 square feet, what is that, 2 feet by 6, or, I'm sorry, a 4 foot by
12.
12 foot platform can be
Mm-hmm.
put there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems very
I
specific,
mean,
but
it couldn't be an 8 foot by 8 foot. It could only be 48 inches wide. Is that correct? That's what I'm trying to
Well, it
understand.
could be 4 by 12. Anything that equals 48, however
Yes.
you square it up.
Right.
right. Yes, it can't, that
One dimension could not be wider than 48 inches.
Yep.
So if somebody wanted to build a fire pit with a deck or flagstone, that would be prohibited within the 50 feet.
The deck would be, but if you did a flagstone, you'd be able to do that. Because that's not a structure, like paving patio or patio pavers is
Yeah.
not considered a structure.
Okay.
So would just be structural, so a deck, no matter what the height.
Okay.
This is also, well, depending on how we write the definition of
I
structure.
was just going to say, it's all going to depend on how you define structure, because I go back to the case and, is it a structure? Can you build something that's on wheels and you can move it around? Is that a structure or not? Is it required to be attached to the ground or not?
Right.
Because those were the arguments. What's attached to the ground? Well, if you prepare a bed with pea gravel and you have layers of stone on top of that, and then you put giant rocks on top of that, is that a structure?
Mm,
Is a structure designed by an architect and an engineer, or is it by somebody in the backyard with a pick and a shovel?
right.
So those were all the contentious things in that ZBA case.
Right. And I was just gonna say, is a fence a structure? Because we talked about fences before and where fences could be located. But if you say that a fence is a structure, then it can't be within 50 feet of the high water mark. And I'd have to look back at our fencing section, because I think the fencing section does allow some type of fence. So I may need to bring into here item C and then say something about fences. I'll have to look back. That just came to me. Fences. Okay. This lake access section, this comes from the current ordinance. This has to do with, sharing waterfront. If you have back properties that all want to use one piece of property to gain access to the water. This talks about that part in the ordinance. So if you have more than two people sharing property, then you have to, have additional lot size and width on the water for that property. Talks about your dock and your swim raft that, like I said, is in the existing. And then talks about mooring and watercrafts and the number of watercrafts, and the number of docks.
Yeah, I had a question on the number of watercraft. Does
Mhm.
4 personal watercraft replace 3 registered, or does that replace 1? I didn't understand that.
What's it say? It's, I think that's probably cleared up in the definitions.
This ordinance was written for 3 watercraft, with personal watercraft being a half. So you could have 2 boats and 2 watercraft, two jet skis. So 2 jet skis represent 1 watercraft. That's the way this was originally written.
Yeah, but Laura, didn't we just rewrite this like 2 years ago?
Yeah, not even, I think,
And because that
like
was,
last summer.
yeah, that was the big argument about how many,
Yes, your
Lifts you can
husband
have.
was very adamant about the numbers.
Yes,
here.
I recall.
Yes. You heard all about it, didn't you?
so is this similar to what you guys?
I don't know. I'd have to go
Have to
back
go
and
back.
look.
Well, in any case, I think how it's written, it's hard to determine what is meant, whether that, the way Lee explained it is a lot easier to understand. 2 watercraft
Right.
equal 1, or 2 personal watercraft equals 1.
Right, so they're saying here that you can't have more than 4, which would equal 2 boats then. So it's limiting
Right.
it, yeah.
Right.
We could, I know that this was a big topic and this is something the planning commission worked on recently. I find it kind of bizarre to regulate boats and docks in a zoning ordinance since we don't regulate water. The water area is covered by the state, the DNR.
But
Just
the-
as a
the
side
ord-
note.
The ordinance was written with the provisions of the watercraft in order to control the funneling. Because you didn't want to have 2 families have access to the lake through one piece of property and have 10 boats out there. This came from the ordinance before this, just specified 3 motorized watercraft. And a proposal was brought to the township for Peterson's property by a developer who proposed a condominium with a dock for 3 motorized watercraft and 33 sailboats. And the developer's attorney, specifically, he came in and he said that it was his job to circumvent the township zoning ordinance in whatever way possible. So they were not allowed to proceed. But that was one of the catalysts for this. And at the same time, there was a property at, I think it's 7 something, it's right next to Bob Spencer's property. There's a home being built there now, but for years that was vacant. But there was property that was owned, that was contiguous to Agaming's property. And at the time, Agaming was a little more involved with condo development. And there was concern that if Agaming bought that property, they would have direct access to the lake for everything on Agaming's property. So that's just a little background of where this ordinance came from.
Well, I wrote down here to simplify maybe and do it either as more like bullet points or to explain it a little bit better.
Yeah, that was my big thing was it's a big chunk of words.
Yeah.
Can we make it shorter and bullets?
Yeah. Yep, I can do that. Maybe I can do something up in number 1 too.
So, yeah, under 4.25, down there, item 1 on page 17, use, I'm sorry, it starts there, but following on page 18, you refer to the front lot line. Are you referring to the front lot line as the water side there?
I'm not seeing it.
Except as provided in subsection 3 below.
Oh, right there.
Okay, so.
That's a holdover. I need to correct that. Okay, anything else in this section? Okay, 4.2.6, the shoreline protection strip. This is also new. This is when Heidi came and talked to the planning commission, she really encouraged us to require some sort of vegetation along the waterfront to help filter the water from the grass. So, you know, grass is better than nothing, but other vegetation other than maintained lawn is better because you put fertilizers and things like that on your maintained grass. So this is trying to help with that. So this is within 30 feet. We're talking about this vegetation strip or shoreline protection strip, and you're trying to maintain the existing. You can prune the existing. You can remove dead and diseased trees. And then we get into item E, talks about restoration of that shoreline protection strip. And this has to do with new dwellings and seawalls. I don't know how everybody feels about that, or if you want to require it at more times. Some communities talk about, you know, if you add an accessory building, if you add anything, or if you increase the impervious surface, you have to increase your shoreline protection strip. Just depends on how aggressive you want to be. Being that this talks about a new dwelling and a seawall, it's going to take quite a long time to get the protection strip built up, which is better than nothing. But if you say anytime somebody pulls a land use permit for a deck or a garage or anything, and you're moving towards that every time. But it would just be whatever you're interested in doing and how aggressive you want to move towards that. Or you may have no interest in it. I mean, like I said, this is a brand new section to the ordinance.
I think it's very important to have this closely tied into the master plan too, this particular feature.
Well, my take on it was that I don't know how to enforce it. I mean, I just don't. I mean, once a house could go up and 10 years from now and the vegetation dies or whatever, I guess the township would have to buy a boat and go up and down the shoreline because you're not going to see it from the road. The neighbors would have to complain.
Right.
And I just, you know, personally, I think something like this has to be with the PC. They have to decide and have the public hearing and see what the outcry is. But I just think this is putting in a lot of restrictions. I know Milton wanted to do this. I don't know if they ultimately did, but it'd be interesting to know what the impact is. I would suspect they're seeing very little impact because this could take 50, 70 years for it to have an impact.
Yeah, they did put it in their ordinance, and a lot of times Heidi's the one that catches it when she's out doing soil erosion permits for construction. But if somebody is just cutting down the trees with no permit, you know, it would be neighbor complaint based to get us out there to do any kind of enforcement on it. The hardest, not the hardest part, but a big portion of adding this in would be the community education, and that it exists so that people aren't cutting their trees, whatever's left. And that also helps us because then if people become aware of it, they will let us know when their neighbor's doing something. And we do, you know, there's Torch Lake Association, or, you know, that we can get information to as well. And they could help inform their members, but not everybody's a member of that organization. Or
Well, there's been an ongoing effort by TLA and TLTA and Heidi and to educate people in terms of having this type of issue be a recommendation rather than a requirement, because just from our conversation, people, you don't know what people are doing unless you're a neighbor. And I'm not, the problem is there's so many new people that are moving up here, and they want to put lawns in, you know, or they want to cut all their trees down. I mean, look at Tim Bays' house. I mean, it's incredible. It just, but there's too many people like that. There are builders up here who don't care. They'll do what the owner wants.
Right.
And so there are things in place to provide the homeowner with all the information they need on the proper way to treat your shorefront property, your waterfront property. That's already in place. It's a matter of how do you get them to pay attention to it.
To read it.
Well, board, what do you think? Do we pass this off to the planning commission, let them tackle it? I think, Laura, your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think that I think the community and the planning commission was interested in including things like this.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
we'll let the language flow to them and
Okay.
let them fine tune it.
Yeah,
And I had one other question on this section. Placement of beach sand shall be prohibited. So what if,
What section was that?
it's under E 6.26 E in the middle of the
Yeah.
paragraph, and then it's referred to under G1 as well. And which I understand a lot of places do that, like on lakes that you know, they bring in and make their own beach. And I'm assuming that's what this is intended for, but there is a lot of property that actually is sand.
Mm-hmm.
And so does the use of existing or pre-existing site soil and rocks include sand, therefore placement of beach sand? If somebody had to restore a sandy beachfront, say, I'm not sure what an example would be, but maybe they put a seawall in and they wanted to backfill it. Well,
Mm-hmm.
it's sand.
Yeah.
So,
Or dirt. I mean,
but
it's
there's
what kind of seawall it is.
yeah, I mean, if it's on Torch Lake, it's probably dirt. But if it's on Lake Michigan, it's probably sand.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think this intent is to not have people come in and build beaches, or restore the beaches, let it be natural. So if you had a beach, you brought beach sand in, and that sand over the years went away, you wouldn't be able to bring a truckload of sand in to make your beach.
Well, I know, for instance, the north end of Torch is all sand, the shoreline. And our neighbors, the Whites, because of the current and the wave action coming from the south, has a lot of erosion, and they have to bring in sand to replace it, and it ends up going back out in the lake. So I'm not sure that I want to put that type of restriction, that there's got to be some kind of clause or rewording of this, that if there's a pre-existing sandy beach, that in fact that can be maintained. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is that beach erodes, you get down to clay or something, and now you've got a real mess, and you can't dress it up because it's going to be an erosion area.
Yeah, so I can put in there, I'll take it out of E, potentially, and then just in G say unless it's to maintain an existing beach area or something like that.
All right. That's a good one.
Just wondered what would happen if I needed to do some restoration on my beach. Would I be throwing black dirt down?
Yeah.
Or what?
And you figure you're all part of the dunes along there.
Mhm. So it's sand and rocks.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so 4.3 is the Village Business Overlay District. So my intent with this is to, right now in our zoning map, we have a Village Business District and we have a Village Residential District. And instead of doing it that way, how it's existing, everything is going to be Village Residential. Because in our Village Business Districts, we allow everything we allow in our Village Residential District. But then there would be certain properties, and this is where I'm creating this overlay, where you could have these additional special uses. So everything that's allowed in the residential district is allowed. But if you're in the village district and you have frontage on 31, M88, or Barnes Park Road, you would be able to apply for one of these special uses.
This includes the Torch Lake Little Business District down there.
Where like Scoops is in that?
Yeah, where
Yeah.
Scoops and in that small box area.
Yeah,
Because I guess you would include US 31 as part of that for that area.
right, because that would be zoned village. That would have a village, like the
I think
Torch.
it's already village residential, but there's a little piece that is in there
Yeah.
that's village commercial.
Yeah, there's a little bit more than that, yeah, for village commercial there. So, yeah, this would allow, and it might be easier if I had a map, I'm thinking back on it now, that could show you the areas because, let me make a note.
Are you saying that there is no longer than village residential, village business, all of it is village, and then there's the overlay of this village business?
Correct.
Okay, so, okay, this one confused me because all the way through like the chart, we still had village residential,
Yeah.
village business. Okay, so it makes
Yeah.
sense now. Gotcha.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying, yes. I apologize about that. I was thinking about it with the chart, but that was to help, yeah, build the special use table for those. So yeah, everything would just be village. And then if you have this frontage, then you could have these additional uses in that district. And then you'll see it says from amendment process, the design requirements, because at the time I sent this out, we hadn't made it through that amendment process for how the building space, what they look like, that we just adopted. So that would come into here. Does anybody have any questions, concerns?
Yeah, I do, and I might have missed this, but the identification of the village is going to be the current village business and village residential.
Yes.
As it's defined today, that's going to be the village.
Mhm.
And then, okay.
Because most of the commercial stuff we're gonna want to see on the main road anyways. You're not gonna want to back kind of off the main road in the village. And a lot of the properties in the village district are on the main roads anyways. It's not a very deep district, I guess I should say. The alternative would be to say, any properties within 100 feet of these would be included if there were shallow properties, or so you don't get properties that are too deep getting into residential areas. But let me bring you back a map that shows it to try to define that area a little bit better.
Yeah, the map is going to be critical because it's going to be a big issue with people living there.
It's going to be confusing, I think is.
Yeah.
Gotta.
Right,
it
do you
clear.
see it? Yeah. Yeah, so I think the map will help with that. And so then the design requirements, I need to bring those over. I don't know how familiar everybody is with those, but that was just added into the ordinance. So,
Laura knows all of that.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so those would come over for the village.
Okay.
So, any other questions about Article 4? Okay, let me find Article 9 then.
This one, I'll admit that I think of PUDs as a real development, and as opposed to maybe just one-off type of things. So maybe helping with the definition of a PUD and, some examples, given our community, where and what that might look like, just before we get into trying to figure out the details that are in here. At least that would help me a little bit. I don't know, Laura, you're familiar with this stuff, I'm assuming,
With what? I'm sorry.
with PUDs.
I wasn't around with,
Is that Algamine? Is that,
I missed that.
Yeah.
Algamine is the PUD,
Mhm.
and that's what you lived through.
Yeah.
Lucky
So I
you.
suspect you have a lot of input on this section.
So let me get there.
But there's no PRD and
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the difference is in the current ordinance, you can have a PUD and then you can have a PRD, which is just residential. So this just treats them all the same. They're all just a PUD. If you want to do it that way, you don't have to specify that it's only residential. It would just be up to you as a developer to call it a PUD. So this chapter is all about land development options. For people to be able to create subdivisions or developments on larger properties is usually the intent for it. The first one is that planned unit development. So for that, discussion, so a planned unit development, you're kind of developing a site master plan for the property, and then you are coming along and approving site plans for specific portions of it. I think that's the easiest way to try to understand it, is that you're master planning a site. So someone may come into the planning commission and go, I don't know exactly what this building is going to look like, but I know that I want to put multifamily residential here, single family residential here, and up front here, I'm going to have a commercial component that's going to be office and maybe some small retail. And the planning commission can go through, they can hold the public hearings on that, get input on it, and then make a decision on if they want to allow that. And then the developer, when he's coming through and doing phase one, he brings the site plan for phase one into the planning commission, and the planning commission can review that site plan for consistency with the zoning ordinance and their site master plan, get those approved, they can get permits and start construction. It helps in development because, you can't, approvals are only good for so long. Site plan's only good for a year, a special use permit's only good for a year. And this planned unit development allows for more time to deal with that, because you can have a large project, this large plan, and the vision, but then work on it in bite-sized chunks as you're going through the process. So
So I believe we have two PUDs right now, and they're both would be grandfathered under the current for the uses that they have.
What's the second one?
In Birchwood down there off Creswell.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when you go down Creswell, before you get to Golden Beach Drive, it'd be on the northeast section of that. It pretty much is residential.
Okay.
And I found out about that in the middle of the argument discussion.
So in 9.2.2, and this will be something to kind of think about and discuss, item B says that only uses allowed in the district are allowed to be in the PUD. Item C says that uses not permitted in the district can be allowed, but here it talks about not occupying more than 50% of the developed area for those additional uses that are not currently allowed in that district. The idea of a PUD is to allow creative and innovative ways or maybe uses that aren't currently contemplated in our ordinance, or a combination of uses that aren't contemplated in our ordinance. So I would encourage you to allow for these uses that aren't permitted in the district, but you are not required to in any way. You could say you can have a PUD, but you can only have uses that you allow in that district. But people won't use the tool as much if you say you can only do what you can do in the district, because why do I want to go through this process?
So this is another case, by the sounds of it, that is part of the master plan, because if we don't want this type of stuff going on, we'd have the master plan say we don't want to have PUDs. Is that right?
Right, and your master plan, I mean, when you're approving the PUD, it needs to meet your master plan and the intent of your master plan in the district. So, a good,
So
I'm
what
not
do you-
gonna say a good
Since they're already
example.
here, you have to have it in here, but in the master plan, you say, we're not gonna,
Right, I mean, you
expand
don't
it?
have to, we could take it out. You don't have to allow PUDs as a form of development in the township if you don't want
so that
to.
would just mean there will be no more.
Right. The only way that you can develop property is through traditional means, where you can subdivide the property into a site condo, or this also has clustered housing in it. Those are your options.
How can the planning commission facilitate not having PUDs in the new ordinance when we already have two?
They would just be kind of grandfathered in.
But you'd have to have some sort of language to manage if they want to do anything further with the property.
Yeah.
They have to have some sort of framework for defining how they can manage that property.
What I would do is in the non-conforming section of the ordinance, I would put non-conforming PUDs and then say those PUDs that were previously approved, here's how you would go about amending them.
I personally didn't have, like, the only thing I had noted on here was, number one, I must know, every time it says PUD development, do we need development again? Since,
Probably not.
okay.
That's kind of like tart trails though, isn't it? Like, cause tart stand isn't the last T trails.
Oh, I didn't know what it stood for.
That's
I
what
don't
I
know.
always, every time I say it, I'm like, is that right? But I've never noticed it with PUD development, but you're right.
So I don't know, because I was making myself, like, I'm not really good at acronyms, so I made myself say it every time
Yeah.
I was reading it in my head. So that made me wonder. So that was really the only major thing that I had noted. I didn't have any problems with
Mhm.
anything that it was saying.
So in the difference between the current PUD process and this PUD process is that right now, a PUD is essentially a zoning ordinance amendment. We're amending the zoning ordinance to add that district on. So you're going through the process. The planning commission is making a recommendation. It goes to the county, it goes to the township board. They amend the zoning map, and then you have the construction plan, the site plan. This is more like a special use process. The master plan, the site master plan comes to the planning commission. The planning commission reviews it, holds a public hearing, and makes the decision on it. And then they go through the site plan process. And that site plan process doesn't have a public hearing. It's just review the site plan, make sure it meets your site master plan and the zoning ordinance.
And does that go then through Antrim County and then the board or not?
No.
Are you saying that there would not be a public hearing?
There would be a public hearing when the planning commission is reviewing the site master plan. So there's still a public hearing, yes. But it doesn't go, the township board is not involved in a PUD in any way now. It's all just
Because-
on the planning commission level.
Throughout here, it talks about the township.
Mhm.
So my concern was, as far as the township goes, that when that word is used, that I think of in terms of the township board as opposed to strictly in the planning commission.
Yeah.
And it, township is used intermingled throughout here, even in the same sentences as the planning commission. So it sounds like it's a separate entity. Because that was one of my things I couldn't figure out, all right? Where, because in here, some places it says that it goes to the township board.
Oh, it does?
Yeah. I'll have to find it, but
Well, I can double check that. It's just-
I don't understand why it wouldn't go to the township board.
You can make it go to the township board. That is completely just a policy question. I personally,
I mean, other zoning ordinance issues go to the township board, right?
the only thing that goes to the township board is a rezoning request. A special use permit doesn't. The subdivision, let me look, I don't remember now if I had that going to the township board.
one of them
For,
is 9.3.2D, the conservation easement has township board in it.
yeah, the condominium subdivisions, I might have going to the township board. So that would make sense there.
I gotta find it.
I don't
Yeah,
though.
it's
That's
in
that's not consistent.
9.4.3D, plan application date and information required. The township board there is establishing the fee. Well, you can do a word search, I
Yep.
guess.
Yeah, I'll take a look and make sure. Yeah, pros and cons for this PUD going to the township board or staying with the planning commission. I understand wanting to send it to the township board. They're ultimately the policy setters of the township. They are the ones that are elected. And, the planning commission is just making a recommendation. There could be some concerns at the board level that maybe the planning commission would be approving something that the township doesn't want or something like that. The negatives of going to the township board is that they're elected, so they're political. They can be driven by other reasons than just what the ordinance says. And a lot of times that can complicate issues because then people threaten that if you make a decision, what they're going to do to you because you're elected. Not to say that would happen with this board, but just, in general. So personally, I like to take a lot of the decisions away from the board and put them down to the planning commission because they don't have that political component to making the decisions. They are responsible, they answer to the board, and if they are making bad decisions, the board will replace them at the planning commission. But I can also see the planning commission going, yeah, let's put the responsibility on the board. Then, when people get upset, we can say the board did it. We didn't do it at the planning commission level. So your ears perked up over there. You're like, yes, send it to the board. So it really is just a policy decision from a township perspective. How much kind of oversight, I'm comfortable with the planning commission making the decision. I feel like you have the staff at your disposal to be able to do that. You're not running on, the PC chairs accepting applications and putting packets together. You have a zoning administrator, you have a planning consultant that's helping the planning commission through this process, providing them documentations, making sure that it's meeting the zoning ordinance. Because you do have that available to you, I'm not as concerned about the planning commission having the sole discretion in that.
I guess I just look at it from a business standpoint that certain levels of activity require certain levels of approval. And to me, something like a PUD is a massive activity. It's a massive change in the township. It is has a significant impact on the township. And that would be the type of thing that would need multiple levels of approval just to make sure that all your I's are dotted and T's are crossed. There's a lot of lower level activity that doesn't make, if the planning commission wants to change a few definitions I don't see that needing to go to the township board necessarily, but this is a major project to me. A PUD is a major project in a community that has emphasized they want to retain its rural character. So I just, and
Well, when you went through yours at Augustine, was the board involved in the final decisions?
I was no longer on the planning commission when the final decisions were made.
But you would have seen did the
Yeah.
township board get involved in it or not?
I'm thinking back that at certain points in time, we did reach the point where it went to the township board because we got a kickback. I can't recall the specific instance, but
What year was that? Because we'll go back in minutes of the township board and the planning commission and see what the records say. Veronica, put that down on that. Because have we not loaded the board minutes and planning commission into our, so we've already scanned all those documents in. So we ought to be able to, this would be a perfect test for that. I know.
well, it'll be interesting to see because my mind's a little bit foggy, as you get older, something that happened 10 years ago changes its dimensions of perception.
Okay, well, we'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
Okay, well, I just think even no matter, my position is that for something as significant as this type of activity, it should have multiple levels of approval.
That's Laura. Annette?
It sounds like it's a huge thing. Everybody makes it sound like it was not a fun process. I hope I never live to see one going in while I'm sitting here. And I feel like it depends on how well we document things and what does the master plan look like? How detailed is it? If it's really detailed, then I would be more comfortable with letting it through faster, easier. But the way it stands today, I don't think so.
Laura, your thoughts?
I'm not sure. I have mixed feelings. It seems like an awful lot of work for no land available to do much with, although could somebody take an agricultural piece of land and change it? And that may be, then if that's the case, then it might be really important to have this spelled out. Is your question whether it needs to go to the board or not specifically?
Because if it does, then in each of these phases, I would think we'd then want to identify maybe in piecemeal that it goes to the board so that you don't go through the whole process and then the board dumps on it.
Right.
The idea would be, as you segment this process, you test it with the board as you go through it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I need to clarify one thing about, and then relates to what Laura said about if the process is followed and everything is done properly, that would make a difference. With the Agaming situation, we made some huge mistakes. And part of that mistake, in my opinion, was made because we got some bad legal advice. And that was on me because I made decisions that were based on legal advice, and I was too much of a rookie in the planning game to realize what that attorney was recommending compared to what our planner recommended.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up in terminating our planner. And I just in retrospect, and this isn't the first time I've said this, we made a mistake in rezoning rather than going with the special use permit process. That's what we should have done. We probably would have gotten it taken care of in a year. But the attorney he says, you need to rezone. And we didn't know any better. So anyway, so I would think that if the planning commission follows all the proper procedures
And
and,
the procedures are enumerated properly, then it shouldn't go to the board. It should stay with the planning commission. That's,
well,
I
I can understand that argument. I will always take the position that a significant activity should have more than one level of approval. That's all. That's just my business, my business sense, which doesn't necessarily apply to local government. So I
Is
just,
there an amen for that?
that's what I'm saying. I'm straddling the fence, right? No, but I'm, my position is it should go to the board. But I can understand why it wouldn't be something that I would fight in front of the planning commission. If that's what the planning commission feels is the right way to go, I wouldn't fight it.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be, if we really try to look forward and put some things into the master plan like this, I mean, housing is insane. So I can see us ending up in the position here where there's gonna be really big appetite for this, and it might not be so bad.
So how would we protect the process? You know, rezoning versus special use permit that requires the public hearing, and then there's a multitude of things that have to come into play other than just the plan itself. Because I look at, in going through this, there is a lot of stuff in here. And calculating densities and those types of things, that's beyond me at this point. But the idea is if it's beyond the PC sufficiently, then you're really depending on two people, right? Your planner and a lawyer. And so I'm trying to figure out, how do we make sure that there's an off-ramp in the process to make sure that, you know, it doesn't get sideways somewhere? So is the special use permit for PUDs, do we pigeonhole it in there and then have the process around that? And have the various votes necessary as you go through the segments? And have each segment like with a public hearing until you have the whole package? Because I don't know how somebody can look at a huge master plan and say, okay, that's what we want to do. I mean, I can't imagine it, but again, to your point, a big project's going to take what, 100, 200 acres? Do we have property, contiguous type of property in our township with 100, 200 acres?
Pretty close, right up McLaughlin and 31, it's for sale right now.
How many acres is that?
Well, there is quite a bit of acres there. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what it totals, they're different parcels.
But it's zoned agricultural.
Yes.
So that means you got to go through rezoning, right?
Or a PUD, right?
Well, you're gonna,
Or it's a
Right.
special use process, which is
Right.
what is being explained here.
Yeah.
it's gonna be a rezoning no matter what.
Well, not really, because it's not going through the rezoning process.
Why wouldn't it?
I mean, you could make it, but when you go through the rezoning process, it takes longer to do it.
Right.
So, I mean, you can, and that's fine, and it gives more oversight. There's the couple of, one of the issues with making it a rezoning is you rezone the property to PUD and then the development doesn't happen. It makes it very difficult for the next person to be able to develop or use that property.
Right.
They have to go through and rezone the property to residential or agricultural or something to be able to use it how the regular ordinance allows. So I've seen that happen because then the property, people don't want to buy it because they don't want to go through that rezoning. They don't know if it's going to happen. Plus to go through the rezoning just to rezone it PUD can take a lot of time. So if people are looking to buy property, a rezoning process can take 3 to 6 months. So you've got people that have property contingent to buy it based on a rezoning. It can stall or slow down.
I need
that
some
progressive.
help there.
Okay.
If you have this, say, a piece of agricultural property,
Mhm.
and somebody wants to come in and put a PUD in,
Mhm.
doesn't it have to be rezoned as a PUD to do that?
Well, you can either rezone it or you treat it like a special use permit.
Also, it'd be a special use permit and the property would stay agricultural?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And I did misspeak because I was, this does have, in this decision, it does go to the Township Board what's in your ordinance. And I think I left it that way because that's how the current ordinance, even though it was a rezoning.
Where is that?
It's on page 29, item D. It says decision. I was looking at the site plan part of it when I said that is only at the planning commission level. I like it to stay all at the Township Board level. So it's section 9 near the
There
bottom.
it is. Yep.
Cool.
So.
Yeah.
So, but it's not a rezoning. It's just one of those things. Planning Commission reviews it, holds a public hearing, makes a recommendation. The Township Board ultimately approves it. So it's kind of a hybrid of doing the rezoning, except for you're cutting out the county to get to the Township Board. And it doesn't officially rezone it. So if somebody does get this approved after so long, it just goes, if they don't do it, it goes away, it reverts back to being ag or whatever.
So basically, it's a special use permit process.
Yes.
See, if you had been here 15 years ago,
I could have
I'd have all
been,
my hair.
yeah, I could have been, but I would not have been as knowledgeable as I am right now.
All right, so Township Board right now in here has the final vote on it.
Yeah.
It's going to be treated as a special use permit.
Mhm.
So then the question for us in looking at this is to see if the steps make sense.
Yeah. So, and are you comfortable, and this could be a planning commission discussion, are you comfortable in a planned unit development allowing for uses that aren't listed in your ordinance or in that district, allowing for them to vary from the zoning standards? To me, it's kind of like a give and take. So if they're going to give the community something, would you allow them to reduce their setbacks from the underlying zoning district? Or would you allow them to increase their density from what's allowed in there? It's not intended to get around the ordinance. You're not just doing a PUD to do that, but it's kind of like if you give us this, which it not necessarily give you anything. It could be a park or it could be something to the public, but more like the benefit that you're giving the community by having this development, we would allow you to get but give you these different standards.
Shouldn't we have those listed?
Well, it would be something they would put in their plan and their report. They would say, your ordinance allows us to have one dwelling unit per acre. We're requesting to have 3 dwelling units per acre. And then when you're going through and approving their plan, the planning commission, the township board would decide if that's acceptable or not.
Or that's part of the special use permit?
Right. Okay. I just want to make sure you were comfortable with that flexibility. And this does allow for a planned unit development in any district. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. I would encourage you to, just because you never know. You don't know what you don't know. It does help to encourage creative uses of property. I guess that could be positive or negative, depends on how you take those terms. So that's all about planned unit developments. Everybody's good with that?
Yeah, I just had a little picky thing. I
Mhm.
think in one spot you say that it has to be
recorded at the Grand Traverse County
Yeah, I got that
Register
one.
of Deeds, and then another place at the Register of Deeds, but no county listed, so I'm assuming this should all be Antrim County.
Yeah, where's the one that doesn't have the county listed?
That is 9.3.2D, conservation easement, the very bottom of that paragraph.
Register of Deeds, yep. Yep, I will add that in. Yeah, I have, that's a Grand Traverse County is a bad habit of mine. I'm so used to being in I grew up there. I did a lot of work there. Everybody's Grand Traverse and everybody's a township. Even when I'm in a village and a city, everybody's a township.
So I'll walk through some stuff. 9.2.4 E, when you have permanently preserved, how is that taking place? Because I think in terms of a conservancy, and for that particular thing, you're saying 4 out of 8 have to be met in order to proceed, if you will. Because then this is referenced when we get over into 9.2.6C, where it says you got to meet the minimum quality requirements. My question is, in reading them, why isn't it 8 of 8?
I think it could be.
I mean, I look at all 8 of them, and I would think all 8 of them are things that we'd want to be done if they want to do this thing.
Yeah.
I agree.
The 0.6 in E, second sentence, where it says site development provide trees and landscaping beyond minimum requirements. Are we setting ourselves up that there's an exception analysis that has to take place? Because I don't know if it's required that they go beyond the minimum requirements or they just can. I just didn't understand why we were putting in that type of language. Because it just seems like the township could come in and say, you got to put in more than what we require. And so who's going to make that determination?
Yeah. So you don't like that language there?
Well, it's just, it doesn't seem that there's an answer that comes out of the question.
Yeah.
So that just might be rewording. On 9.2.6C, the items in bold, I'm not sure do you want to say final PUD there, or do you want to say preliminary PUD? Because we're nowhere near getting to a final PUD in this section, right?
Right.
So I'm not sure, because it feels like there's steps here, and that if you get to this point and you haven't done it, you're not going any further anyway.
Right. Yeah, I think it's because this has to do with some of the preliminary pre-application meeting and review that they're kind of saying, even if the planning commission gives you a nod or finds that you're meeting these qualifications, until we get a complete full application, there's no guarantee.
Of anything.
Right.
So I guess I'm not sure if final is the right thing or of the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think we can take that word final out.
Then why I'm confused is I would look at 9.2.7. In that paragraph, it says at the very end, unless otherwise approved by the township. Because we also talk about any person owning or controlling land in the township. So who's the township? There's got to be an entity to be approved. So is the township in this case the planning commission, or is this something that you're thinking that it's got to come up to the board to get this approval?
No, I think they could be the zoning administrator even, because that's just the size of the drawings, the scale of the
Yep.
drawings. So
Well,
I'll just
that's what
put
I
zoning
put down
administrator.
as ZA would be.
Yeah, I hate to put those kind of things on the zoning administrator, being a zoning administrator, because it's, I make the call and then the planning commission doesn't like my call and then I got to deal with them. So but it should be the zoning administrator.
Do
That's
we,
fine.
in the section where we talk about, is it defined when any of the applications are put in for special use?
Mhm.
And, you go through and check all the stuff preliminary to make sure it qualifies. Does it say in that wonderful section that you did, does it say you?
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
I'll double check. I'll make a note to look back at the site plan requirements and see if it says that.
Then I get to 9.2.8. I'm assuming that the review is basically a review by the planning commission of the work that the ZA has done to date.
Mhm.
Is my interpretation of that. And then in C, finding the facts.
Mhm.
Given our recent history, how are you going about determining the finding of facts? Is there a process that is going to be followed? Or is the PC, by the looks of it, the PC is going to adopt finding the fact, which means they're going to create their own finding of fact for this specific PUD, and where do we get the consistency?
I'm wondering if I missed that section. The findings of fact should be referencing the special use standards.
Back to the
There
8
should be.
points.
Yep. And the qualifying standards in this section.
Which was
Those
D.
8 that you just, said that we should require those 8, not just 4. So I completely missed that. Yes, that's a good point. So that would be my intent. I'll add
Yep.
some language in there to say that you're going to use the special use standards and qualifying standards.
All right. So 9.2.9 references Article 7. Should we, that's the whole article. Are there specific sections that you want them to look at, or you want them to look at the whole article?
That's the whole thing. So this now gets into each individual phase or construction part where you're just doing a site plan review on that building or buildings. So they'll just kind of go through your regular Article 7 site plan review process.
All right. Then in 9.2.9C, does the township issue a certificate of occupancy, or is it the county?
The county does.
Okay.
When does a certificate of occupancy be required? After everything's built?
Yeah,
For
well.
Each individual house, that's a normal process,
Yeah.
but
Read the second sentence. After you do that, you say, shall not be issued by, certificate of occupancy shall not be issued by should be county, I believe, for any use not allowed in the current zoning district, but approved as part of the PUD in a given phase. So the question is, are we then going by phase, and if some phase fails, we put a stop to it here, or because that was the second thing I was trying to figure out under the guarantees, because I think that was chapter 7 has the fees and the penalties.
Mhm.
And the question is, the guarantees on this thing, if they get halfway through or a quarter of the way through and they go bankrupt or something, we got this half-finished stuff. How are we determining, who's determining back to your wind turbines, not to get you going on the wind turbines. You're not allowed to say a word on the wind turbines. But where do we set that parameter in the process?
Yeah.
And I didn't see that in the PUD section, that, because we wouldn't establish that until the actual PUD. So I would think we'd have to put in here as part of the process that the Township Board would then establish the required guarantee prior to even moving forward with this thing.
Yeah, so I think that 9.211 covers you there because it's got fees and performance guarantees for review and approval under this section shall be consistent with the requirements of Article 12.
Yeah, but see, the problem with Article 12, when you go there, it's just a paragraph.
Right,
It
that
says
says,
the board's setting it up. My problem is that that's fine, but I don't want to be setting it up after you've gone through half this package. So
Oh.
the idea would be somewhere in the process, the first phase, once they have their master plan put together, then you gotta sidetrack that thing to figure out how much money are we going to want before we give them the go ahead. Now, I'm not sure exactly where you want to put that, but if we wanted sufficient funds and they weren't happy with that, it could blow up the whole process.
yeah.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay, go ahead.
9.2.10, point D, I'm sorry, I don't understand a density transfer.
Yeah,
shall
we took the
nullify.
we took the density transfer stuff out, so we don't offer that
Is that what you
option.
said earlier? Or-
No, I think it was something else.
all right.
So we can remove all of D, actually.
Okay. Then 9.2.13, A, minor amendments. Rather than going to the PC, do you want to put the ZA in there?
Yeah, it doesn't, it,
Who determines if it's a minor amendment?
yeah, this should refer to, well, it's criteria in Article 7. It has to do with in the site plan section, it tells you if it's what minor is and what major is. I can't remember. It seems like in Article 7, we did give the power to the ZA for minor
I
amendments,
thought
did we?
did.
So I'll change that and then I'll make a note to say double check to see what we did in Article 7.
Let me know when you're ready.
Okay.
9.3.2, conservation easements.
Yes.
And you'll know, I think you'll know the answer to it, but we had that problem down there in the Traverse Bay Nature Preserve, which was an easement, but the Conservancy, Grand Traverse Conservancy got involved in that thing in the approval of the transfer and the setting it all up. So the question is, do we need to add them into here as part of the approval process for an easement, for them to review it or be a part of it? So I'm not sure how that land conservancy gets involved in developments and things.
Yeah. I think that you
Just
could
to-
lay it out.
Because it's essentially you're going to deed that over to something.
Right.
If you're deeding it over to a conservancy, then you have a whole structure that has to take place. Because then if it's anything like TBNP, then the township ends up owning that, having to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
So this particular thing, setting it in here is going to have ramifications based on how you establish what that easement is, who controls it. And since you want it in perpetuity, it's going to have to be controlled by an entity.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to give that.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess
that's-
how this reads to me is that it has to be either to the township or the township has to approve this nonprofit that is going to hold it. And then you would, so, and then that working with, like the Conservancy, that would all happen kind of outside of the zoning ordinance. That's a Township Board deal for the Township Board to say, yes, we'll accept that conservation easement.
It's, granted by the, to the township or to a nonprofit. All right. That may be sufficient. In the condominiums,
So a condominium subdivision looks like a neighborhood, looks like a subdivision. These are a site condo is what they're referred to typically, but people also just call them subdivisions. They're not your traditional condo where you just own the inside walls and not the outside of the building. So like all new subdivisions are built as these condominium subdivisions as site condominiums. They're not plats anymore. And it's very confusing because the law is written for condos that you own the inside of the buildings, not for the site condos, but that's how it's been developed and continues to go that way.
okay. That's all I had.
So these subdivisions are, the approval stops at the planning commission. Currently, I have seen some subdivisions that have been approved by the township board in the past that were not plats, they were condos. Are you comfortable with having this stop at the planning commission, or would you like this to go up to the township board?
This is the same argument for me.
I look at it probably the same way, that it's a significant character change to the community. And in one way, yeah, there's political pressure on the board, maybe not the same type of pressure on the PC, but you don't know what outside pressures may be on the PC members. It's not the first time in the world that the PC was influenced from the outside world. So at least then there's a second test to it. And, nothing against our PC, but clearly, we don't know what we don't know. And I mean, I don't mind if the PC comes back and wants to arm wrestle over it. But my feeling should be that the township board has final say.
I can add that back in.
Anybody disagree with that? No?
Nope.
No? All right, so we are at 7:53, or 2 hours. It goes by fast when you're having fun. So we are on schedule then for April 4th. And we'll tee up Article 6. And for some reason, we had Article 3 in there as well. Are we revisiting the rework of Article 3?
I think that's what the intent was, to
Okay.
revisit the rework of that. So I owe you that document.
Yep. And so with that being said, is there any public comments? Still don't see any public, so I don't think we'll get any comments. Any comments on the meeting? How many people?
One, briefly at first. And then
All right. So again, the date of the next meeting, April 4th. Any comments from our committee members? I thank you for your time as always. I don't think the community has a clue on the work that you guys are doing for the community or for the planning commission, but I certainly appreciate it. So I'll make the motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, guys.
And I apologize for being late. It will never, ever happen again.
figure it's worth a dinner somewhere.
I'll work on that.